everyone, it's Anne. Melody and I are deep in planning mode for episodes for the rest of the year, and we've got our own list of subjects that we want to cover and guests we want to book. Like, I don't know, could we do an episode about why Paul Mescal is so hot featuring Paul Mescal? Can you make that happen, Melody?
I'll try.
Melody has Paul Mescal's email.
I do have access to IMDb Pro. So.
One time he hearted a tweet that I did with a link to a piece that I wrote about normal people that was about how he was so hot. So maybe he knows. He knows that I think that he's hot. So maybe he would come on the show. What episodes are you still dying to hear? We can do more celebrity image deep dives, or we can go more highbrow like we did it with the episodes on infrastructure or student loans. Whatever you want to do, head to the Google form at tinyurl.com/culturestudypod and join in on our wild and totally undirected brainstorming. And of course, we always need your questions for the Ask Anne Anything part of the show. Those can go in the same form, tinyurl.com/culturestudypod. Okay, thanks. On with the show.
I think reality TV often gets lumped into this category of being like a guilty pleasure.
Yeah.
And I've had to really force myself to stop thinking about it that way, that it's okay for me as a person who I like to think I have relatively highbrow taste in TV, and I watch a lot of prestige TV and, Oscar movies and things for my job, but that it's okay for me to also love these shows. And I think when you talk about it as only a guilty pleasure, you take away that importance and what it means to the industry.
Yes.
It
Absolutely.
also is a really interesting moment to talk about it because Hollywood is going through a lot of changes right now, and you can go back to last summer and fall when the writers and actors were on strike in Hollywood, and this kind of moment that we saw around people in Hollywood understanding the power of collective action and the power of demanding change in an industry that can be really slow to change. And reality kind of got wrapped up in that conversation in a really interesting way. And then lastly, I think Hollywood is also going through this moment of change as a business. Every company kind of chased Netflix down the rabbit hole of streaming.
Yep.
And has found that it's a lot harder to make money in that world than they maybe initially anticipated. And reality is really interesting when you talk about it in that capacity because it is a genre that is cheaper to make. It also is an incredible backbone to so much of TV. It's just part of the nightly programming schedule on many broadcast TV networks, and it's part of the programming mix on every major streaming service. And so when you think about what these services are trying to evolve to become and how they can evolve to be moneymakers and be long-lasting and sustainable, reality is a really important piece of that.
This is the Culture Study Podcast, and I'm Anne Helen Peterson.
I'm Natalie Jarvey. I'm an entertainment reporter who's written about the business of Hollywood for places like Vanity Fair and The Hollywood Reporter.
Do you feel like there is a reality TV show on the air right now, or like in the atmosphere right now, that exemplifies our current whole television industry moment? Like that has, like if you were going to use it to talk about like everything that is happening right now, like this would be the show.
Probably Vanderpump Rules, which recently completed its most recent season. It's going through a real evolution right now as a show, and I think it speaks to a lot of the challenges and opportunities for reality TV right now. And I haven't been able to get it out of my head.
So this is a great opportunity, too, to out myself as someone who selectively watches some reality television, reads a lot of discourse around reality television, but doesn't watch a ton. So, I know a ton about Vanderpump Rules because I have read a lot about Vanderpump Rules. I read the famous, profile in New York Times. I know the plot and know ostensibly what the primary stakes are. But I've never watched an episode. So can you explain for our other listeners who have not seen Vanderpump Rules, what the premise is and why it feels like a perfect show for this moment.
Yeah, I will actually out myself as well as someone who watches a lot of reality TV, but didn't get into Vanderpump until Scandoval. And then I like couldn't look away. It just became such a pop culture moment that I had to consume everything about it and was really curious how the show would come back from that. But it's a show that started out ostensibly following the people who worked in these LA area restaurants owned by Lisa Vanderpump, a former housewife. And, you know, they were struggling, trying to make it in life and in their careers, and, you know, became friends and engaged in romantic relationships. And over time became very famous because of this show. And it all kind of came to a head last year where right as the season was wrapping, the news broke on gossip sites like TMZ that one of the main characters of the show, Tom Sandoval, was caught cheating on his partner, Ariana Madix, with another cast member, Raquel. And it was not caught on tape, but they were still just wrapping up production in a way that Bravo could get cameras back in the room with all these characters to kind of unpack it all in real time. And they had this very emotional finale episode where all of the characters on the show were kind of airing their grievances about this affair and about how they felt about it and about how they felt about being deceived by friends of theirs. And it was really fascinating because it did kind of pull the curtain back from the show. And, you know, the discourse around Vanderpump for a while had been that, you know, how can you really keep up with the charade that these people all work in a bar or, you know, at a restaurant when they're super famous and they're, you know, on podcasts and they're launching merchandise lines and, you know, all these other things. And this moment, they call it Scandoval, you know, became kind of the perfect opportunity for the producers of the show to pull back that curtain and investigate like what was really going on in the real lives of these characters. And so this most recent season followed the aftermath of that moment. And in the final episode, they do it in a really interesting way where the whole episode, you've got Ariana, the scorned former girlfriend of Tom Sandoval. She's trying to move on with her life. And they're all put back together in a room for this event. And Tom is there and Ariana is there and all the characters are there. And everyone's trying to get her to have a conversation with him. And she doesn't want to. And she doesn't want to engage with him in that way. And she ultimately walks off the show. She leaves. And a lot of her fellow cast members call her out for it. They think she's not upholding her end of the reality TV contract, that, you know, when you sign up to do a show like this, you agree to put your whole life on camera, and that, you know, she's setting boundaries for herself, which is completely valid. But they feel like she shouldn't be doing that because she's on a reality TV show. And then in the last moment, as she's leaving, they catch Tom on a hot mic where he says, "This is actually great for me. I love it." And it kind of validates what she's been saying all along, which is that he didn't want to actually apologize to her or have a conversation with her. He wanted to look good for the cameras and he wanted to have a redemption arc. It just poses a lot of really interesting questions about what you owe fans and viewers of a reality TV show when you are putting your life on display in that way.
So just listening to you talk, there's a few things that like stick out to me as exemplary. One is that the show itself started as a spin-off of a character who was on a different reality show, right? So Lisa Vanderpump was a character on Real Housewives, and then they were like, oh, she's interesting. Like, what if we follow all of these people in her orbit? Like, they're nobodies, but maybe also interesting, right? So you have that part. Then you have the part that you kept referring to them, and I think people do this all the time. You kept referring to them as characters. Because they are. They're characters who are playing a role, and sometimes that role is determined for them by the edit, how the editors choose to take the footage that they have, the raw footage, and then edit it. But then sometimes, and this, I think we're going to get a lot more into this over the course of the episode, sometimes characters decide before, because they have watched so much reality television, this is the character that I'm going to be, right? Like they take an archetype and they're like, this is my role in the show. Or the producers tell them explicitly, this is your role in the show, and give them questions that prompt them to behave in certain ways.
Or don't tell them at all and manipulate them into becoming a character that they never thought they were going to play.
Right. And then the third thing is when you reference this like implicit reality television agreement. And I love how you said, they had agreed to have all of their lives on camera, but they don't agree to have all of their lives on camera. They agree to like have the parts of their lives that they know the cameras are going to be there for on camera. And then there becomes this larger expectation that their entire personal lives should also be fair game to then be talked about on camera, right? So it's like this very fuzzy line, which is how I think we get some of this drama. And then the very last thing, like as a celebrity gossip person, that strikes me is like the fact that TMZ is reporting on them. Like this to me is the current iteration. And it's been this way, I would say, since like the late 2000s, actually, when the stars of like The Hills were all over the cover of Us Weekly. Like this is our celebrity now, and it complicates things that there is no explicit division between who they play in their role as a reality star and who they are in their personal lives. So that's just some of like, I think that is a great way to point us to like where we are in this moment.
Yeah, it's a really interesting moment, I think, for reality TV as a genre, for Vanderpump Rules as a show. And yeah, I think you're getting into all of the kind of thorny things that I feel and think about as someone who loves reality TV and loves to talk about it and loves to text all my friends about it when I'm watching a show, but then later feel this kind of guilt or angst around some of these kind of thornier issues that get brought up when you really start to dig into it.
So this is such a great way to tee up our first question, especially thinking about the ways in which viewership of reality TV has actually declined over the last decade, which is interesting. And then also thinking about show budgets just generally shrinking. So talking about the future of reality TV, our first question comes from Liz and will help set the scene for the rest of the episode.
It seems to me that making reality TV is just a way for studios to avoid the labor protections that would be involved in hiring unionized professionals. It feels like in response to the increasing strength of the guilds of actors and writers, the studios latched onto reality TV as a way to use cheaper talent who will complain less. It's disturbing. It seems so clear that cast should be protected. They're acting. We long ago stopped pretending that their behavior isn't highly managed and produced. The filming days are long, and so on. The casts are willing participants, I guess, but it seems like a coercive environment. Is this being discussed in the industry? Is progress possible?
So the first thing I'll say is that it just reminds me of the fact that like our current boom, I think, can be or like the current fashion or the explosion of reality television, at least the way that we studied it when I was a film historian, media historian, is so much of it goes back to the writer's strike in 2007, when so much of the narrative programming was replaced by reality television because of that strike. Reality television was absolutely all over the place before that, but like it just kind of changed the paradigm. So what's your current thinking on this in reality television and unions? Is there any movement to unionize within reality television? How do union workers feel about the fact that like, I think you can make the argument that people working on reality shows are in some way scabbing? Like, yeah, where do we go?
Yeah. So I think it's a really common assumption that you can trace the reality TV boom to the writer's strike. And you're not wrong, but I will push back on that just a little bit to say that, like, for starters, reality TV is just hugely popular, and Hollywood has been making reality TV because it's popular and because Hollywood has always tried to make as much money as they can by spending as little money as possible. So that predates the strike. And it's actually interesting. You can trace this even farther back to the 1988 writers' strike is when Cops became really popular. So this goes back even farther than...
Can you tell listeners what Cops is? I feel like we have some younger listeners who might not have had it on at 7:30 at night every single night on Fox, like me. It was in syndication.
Yeah. It's a reality kind of documentary series that follows cops around as they go to, house calls and, arrest people. And it's very problematic as a TV show.
So, oh my God, side note, it's just like, yeah, absolutely. Like the way that like representation of who are the criminals, right? And how the cops behave and all sorts of things.
Yeah, it positions the cops as heroes, right? And, just hardworking guys doing their job. And, obviously could probably be considered propaganda a little bit now.
Literal propaganda.
Yes.
Literal cops.
Yes, but it's one of those things, people are just fascinated by watching what they believe is like a real slice of life. And, it was incredibly popular. So, and then the real boom we saw began in the early 2000s with shows like Survivor and The Bachelor and Big Brother. I mean, I remember being like a teen, preteen at home watching these shows with my parents. Like it was appointment television to come sit down and watch Survivor. Season 1 of Survivor will like forever be burned into my brain. So then you flash forward to the writer's strike that started in 2007. And a lot of those shows were already on the air and already very popular. And the TV networks leaned into them because they didn't have a lot of other programming to lean into. So it didn't necessarily birth new shows as much as just kind of reinforce the kind of indelible nature of some of these reality shows. The one that I will point out, you've probably heard the story of like, you can trace a direct line from Donald Trump's presidency back to the 2007 writer's strike and The Apprentice. What's interesting there is that The Apprentice had been on the air for several years when the writer's strike hit. What happened was it hadn't been doing that well. It had been flagging in ratings. And it was around that time that they reconceived it as Celebrity Apprentice. And
Celebrity Apprentice, right.
And it aired during this otherwise very thin time for programming because of the writer's strike, because the networks hadn't been able to get a lot on the air. And Celebrity Apprentice became much bigger than The Apprentice.
Oh, that's such a good point. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically like took advantage of the vacuum in other programming and added some like B-list celebrities in there.
Exactly. So it's all really interesting to think about, would people in Hollywood say that they are doing more reality TV, directly because they can take advantage of reality TV workers and participants? Like, of course, they would not say that, but the correlation is there to some degree that yes, these labor movements spurred, kind of increased popularity in these shows. It is also true you can make reality TV for very cheap, which means that everyone involved is being taken advantage of to some degree. They're not earning the same wages as someone working on a big budget, prestige HBO show. And certainly the contestants, the participants in these shows, are often not getting paid very much money if they're getting paid at all.
Right.
So that is kind of the problem implicit in the creation of reality TV.
Well, and it reminds me just of sometimes of like the dynamic that you see in writing for the internet or other creative work that's like, we're not going to pay you very much money, or we're not going to pay you at all, but you'll get paid in exposure, right? Like the idea that you are becoming celebritized and thus can use that fame to pay yourself. That's very problematic now in so many different ways.
Yeah. And just as, writers on the internet have realized that and probably already always known it to some degree, but in recent years, you saw a lot of digital media companies unionize and try to fight back against that. We have started to see that with reality TV workers too. So, there's kind of two different sides to this fight. The first is that there are a number of reality TV workers, people behind the scenes who are crafting the show, who have tried to unionize over the years. The Writers Guild of America has attempted to unionize some of these employees in the past. And you might be thinking writers, for a reality show. There are
writers.
There are a lot of people who are, story editors and
yes.
They might not be writing dialogue the way that you write dialogue for Grey's Anatomy or something, but they are absolutely molding and shaping the show. And those efforts have largely fallen flat. They just haven't
Really?
They haven't worked. There's been a number of different cases. In one instance, a group tried to unionize and they were just fired from the show, and new workers were found to take their job.
Isn't that illegal?
Good question.
Yeah, no, I know. It's very, like, because of the weakening of national labor laws, it's a lot easier to, like, hide behind other reasons why you're firing that crew.
Yeah.
But that sucks.
And the Writers Guild also has at various points kind of dropped the efforts to unionize some of those workers because they've had to, they've had bigger fish to fry, so to speak, and kind of, fighting for other demands and issues that are relevant to their core membership base. So they've had to kind of not pursue that as much as they would have liked in the past. But then there also, in the last year or so, has been a greater effort on the part of reality TV participants to unionize or use collective action to their benefit. And I think this has been really interesting. I do think this was largely an outgrowth of the strikes this last year. Bethany Frankel, one of the Real Housewives of New York, one of the original, she came out and called out the industry-wide practice of not paying residuals to people who appear on reality TV shows. She very specifically said she only got paid like $7,000 per episode for her first season of Real Housewives, and that those shows, live in perpetuity today on Peacock, NBC's streaming service, and are monetized, and she's never seen any of that money. And she really pushed back against that. She also pushed back against hardline NDAs and contracts that reality TV participants have to sign. And she did kind of launch a union effort. And she had a lot of supporters. She had a lot of supporters, some of her fellow housewives. There were also some people in the industry like Lisa Vanderpump who kind of pushed back and said, this isn't feasible. SAG-AFTRA, which is the union that represents actors, said that they would support her and support this effort. But not a lot has come of it. And it's hard and it's tricky because someone like Bethany Frankel, who appeared on many seasons of Housewives, that was her job. And,
Right.
and she should be able to have the same protections that, any actor working in Hollywood has. But a lot of reality TV participants are everyday people plucked off the street who have full-time jobs elsewhere, who might go do a season of Survivor and then go back to their day job and not look back. And so it does kind of make it complicated to figure out how to define who would be able to be a member of that union and how that would work.
Right. Like if you're featured on a reality, like a renovation show, do you get residuals from that episode? Are you like, is that a secondary star? Is that a guest star? Like, how do you differentiate between those two lines? I do think it's possible, right? Like, I think, and different individuals probably are negotiating, maybe not for residuals, but for different parts of their contract. So like, I don't know, like the Napiers who have an HGTV show, like, they are pushing for compensation that reflects their work, but it's all on the individual level. And this is where I think, this is a larger conversation about where collective action can get you. Like, sure, maybe you can negotiate for something, but what happens when you're not on that reality television show anymore? Like, what is your retirement plan? These are all things that unions like are accounting for. And that if you are only relying on what can I get for this one season, it's a short-term strategy.
Absolutely. Healthcare is another big one. Unions are super important to providing healthcare to actors and writers. So, yeah, I think you're right that it is doable. It's just like in SAG, you don't get your SAG card the minute you appear on a TV show. You have to kind of work up to that. And there are certain boundaries and guidelines. The same could be, applied to reality TV stars. It just requires a real effort and willingness on the part of a lot of different parties to engage in that. And it also requires the studios to agree to this. And that will be a hard fight. Absolutely. So I also want to mention one other kind of instance of reality participants pushing back in a slightly different way, because I think this works around some of the issues you get into when you start thinking about unionizing. And that is that a couple of participants on Love is Blind, the Netflix show, have spoken out against their treatment on the show and what they felt like were bad experiences. And two of them have started an advocacy group specifically to provide mental and legal support to reality TV participants. And I think that's really interesting that, there are kind of other ways, going the nonprofit route, going the advocacy route, that you can provide resources and support to people who've been involved in these shows who, feel like when they are leaving the show that they need that, whether it's because of online bullying or because of their experience. And that's really cool that people are doing that.
So this tees up our next question, which is about fandom, what it's like to be a person who enjoys reality TV, and how all of this has changed over the last couple of decades. This question comes from Hannah.
I love joining the online communities for my favorite reality shows, but one consequence of that is that there's often a lot of hate directed towards the less favored or villainous contestants. To what extent is this the producer's responsibility, or is it just an occupational hazard of being a reality star? And is the reticence to cast or edit villains these days part of why reality TV feels like it's not as good as it used to be?
Okay, so first, can you outline some examples of how this animus, for lack of a better word, has been wielded online?
Yeah, I mean, as someone who's watched The Bachelor for a long time, that's the first thing that comes to mind for me, is that, there's almost always a contestant on every season of The Bachelor or The Bachelorette who becomes the villain, whether that's because, maybe she's only prioritizing her relationship with The Bachelor and not her relationship with the other girls in the house, or, something like that. And that's enough, in these in this context to make her the villain. And bullying and online hate has become a real problem. And I think it's not being said by this listener, but should be pointed out as well, that it's disproportionately affecting people of color or people who are LGBTQ. And part of what's so interesting is social media has really changed the whole landscape for reality TV. Yeah. When The Bachelor first started, there was no social media, not in this way, at least. When Survivor first began, Big Brother, the contract, that going back to that social contract of being on a show like this changes a lot when you realize that anyone can be in your DMs or comment on a post or a video, and can say some really awful, horrible things.
Well, and I think that some people would say, oh, well, if you're on the show, just don't be on social media or don't look on the internet. Right? And first of all, to not be on the internet at all and to shield yourself from this sort of thing is very difficult. You also probably will get it in real life, and that's much more difficult to avoid as well. Secondly, if, as we were talking about before, part of the way that these people are conceiving of their compensation is through other opportunities to monetize their celebrity, right? Through brand deals, that sort of thing. They don't have the option to not be on social media. And you might say, oh, that's not a deal I would make for myself, but that is the deal that they have made. And it just makes it really hard. As someone who's received even just mild harassment, it feels like shit. People just telling you you're a bad person based on things that are probably not true of who you are as a person, right? It's based on an understanding. For me, it was something that I wrote about Armie Hammer. For them, it's how they were edited, right? And I think it especially feels like shit when the things that they're saying are also bigoted slurs. Who wants to be exposed to that? Have you seen or heard about production companies or networks or Netflix taking any sort of steps to insulate stars from this sort of harassment? Whether that's making sure that their online profiles are scrubbed through something like Delete Me, right? So that people can't go to their homes, or setting up filters, doing social media training, all that sort of thing.
It's hard. It feels like a lot of these companies can't keep pace with changing technology and social media in a lot of ways. Oftentimes, it's after ABC has released the cast list for The Bachelor or The Bachelorette that it's online sleuths who find things about these people and bring them forward. And you know, to some extent that can be good. You know, like sometimes they will find things that are inappropriate or disclose things about someone that maybe someone should know before going on a date with this person. What's hard about that is oftentimes this is being done after the show has already filmed. Exactly.
Yeah, so it has no bearing.
It has no bearing. But clearly, you know, these companies are not necessarily doing that legwork if this is something that, you know, Redditors can track down in, you know, a matter of days. And that becomes a problem too, because then, you know, sometimes these people get called out for things in their past that rightfully are problematic or insensitive. You know, but the level of hate just churns up to this place where it's hard to have a nuanced conversation and a discourse about it, and that is you know, hugely problematic. So, you know, the only thing I've seen is that, you know, around The Bachelor, there have been calls by like the hosts of The Bachelor to, you know, hey guys, you're our fans. You shouldn't be bullying people for what they do on TV, and you need, you know, that kind of thing. But that only goes so far. And
if someone wants to call someone like a bigoted slur, they're not going to listen to the host of The Bachelor telling them not to do that.
Exactly.
So there's two things that I think are going on here, and one is like, this is a symptom of our larger internet culture, and like reality television just is one of many things that makes people feel like they need to voice their opinion online. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not like this is the same as how people talk about or wield political speech or like leave comments on politicians' Facebook pages. Like, what purpose does this serve? And that's a larger interrogation that I think is and is not about reality culture. And I'm sensitive to this listener's question that's like, it has become bigger than just watching a narrative on television, right? It has become this whole entire universe that also includes the online discourse. And I think people who, I don't know, are fans of like DC Comics have to make those same considerations now, right? Like, do I want to be a fan of DC Comics because like the fans of DC Comics strike me as pretty fascist? So I like, just in general, like this is a characterization that has been made of the way that many DC Comics fans behave online. Like, can you or can you not separate yourself from that larger behavior? And I think that's something to think about. But then the other thing that it makes me think about is this idea with reality stars that there is a greater truth. And this goes into like the fact that they're acting a role when they're in the show, that there is more information to be discovered about them, right? That there is always some sort of revelation that contrasts with what they are trying to be in their reality TV performance. And so that disconnect between who they are on screen and the understanding that there is a real them is what fuels these Redditors or sleuths, online sleuths, to figure out, okay, where is the scandal? Let me find what that disconnect is. And it's a form of celebrity gossip, right? It's trying to unearth scandal. But then it also, like, if I were a producer, if I were an evil producer, I would be like, oh, the greater distance that we create between who this person is in their offline persona and who they are in the show creates opportunity for scandal for more people to want to watch the show. If I were a not evil producer, I would say, oh, well, let's make sure that we try to mirror those two things so there isn't that space to generate scandal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, you know, it's really hard to separate these things. And I think it's not an easy conversation to have because, you know, anyone who goes on a reality TV show today has to understand that social media is going to play a role, and you should be clear-eyed about that. And I would hope that producers are being honest with them about the response that they could have by being on the show. But at the same time, no one expects to go on a show and then receive tons of online hate and bullying. And when that happens, there absolutely should be resources for them and protection for them so that they can go back to living their lives when this is all over, if that's what they want to do.
The only thing I'll say is that if I was having my hair and makeup done every single day, I'd be like, I'm a brand new person. Like, I have a whole new personality.
Oh my
So
gosh.
I get it.
I know. Same. Although I will say the Bachelor ladies have to do all their own hair and makeup for most of the season. So they are just
like they're in full glam though.
Right.
Like they look amazing. So if I curled my hair every day, I would
yes, if I took 2 hours to get ready every day. Yeah, I know. It is amazing. Just this is such a tangent, but to look at old seasons of shows like The Bachelor or Love Island is another one that I love. When you see how their appearances have changed and evolved over time, and how much more effort they do put into their looks now than they used to, thanks to YouTube and tutorials and things. There's a lot more information available on how to curl your hair and how to do your makeup, and it's fascinating.
Everyone has to be a makeup artist these days. Okay, so our next question is about the business model of reality TV, and this comes from a different listener who is also named Hannah.
Why does Netflix seem to be building their own cinematic universe of reality TV stars? I'm thinking Love is Blind, The Ultimatum, The Circle, Too Hot to Handle, and how they're now feeder shows for newer ones like Perfect Match. It feels very traditional considering the MTV playbook, where Real World and Big Brother began feeding into the challenge, with newer feeder shows like Survivor and X on the Beach coming in from other channels. Also, all the events and parties that MTV threw to generate gossip and fan the tabloid flames, which Netflix is now hosting for their reality stars. So I ask, does this playbook stand the test of time? Do we still want 40 plus seasons of the same show? Are these shows even good enough to warrant that? Is this the carrot of someone I vaguely remember from that other show enough to make me watch this new one? And how much does it have to do with keeping the entertainment on demand subscription model alive?
All right, so to me, the basic answer is just like franchising an IP, right? Like that's what makes this easier. But I would love to hear your thoughts on this question.
Yeah, I mean, I love this question because I got so into Love is Blind during the pandemic. And so I've been very fascinated by watching kind of what Netflix has done. And so we can use them and then we can extrapolate out a little bit. But, Netflix has basically since it started making, TV shows, mimicked the strategy of the legacy entertainment companies that came before it.
Yeah.
But the thing about Netflix that is different is they have this huge budget and they're not trying to program a, Thursday night lineup. So they also have kind of unlimited space where if something like reality TV hits with their viewers, they can just double down on it. So they're not just making Love is Blind, but they're also making The Circle and Too Hot to Handle and The Ultimatum. And, they can just go. And then on top of that, they're now producing international versions of these shows, which has always been part of the model of reality TV. But typically American audiences didn't see the Swedish version of Survivor or whatever the show was. Now,
and usually it was backwards too, right? Like weren't many of these shows, not Real World, but many of these shows actually global hits before they were American hits?
Yes. Oftentimes that's the case. And we didn't know about that or didn't have exposure to those shows. And now on Netflix, if you love Love is Blind and you watch all the seasons available, you can go watch Love is Blind Sweden and Love is Blind UK and all these other versions of the show. And it kind of keeps feeding the beast. So it doesn't surprise me at all that then the next step of that is to get as many of the contestants from those shows as possible and put them on a show like Perfect Match, which is Netflix's version of like a reality dating competition show. It's fun and it's silly. I will say for me personally, I don't watch all of those shows and it doesn't bother me. I can still get into a show like that because they do a good job of story building about these characters, even if, again, I'm calling them characters, about these people and the characters that they're playing. Keeps people in their orbit and keeps people talking about their shows and not turning off Netflix and going to Peacock or HBO Max or, any of these other platforms. So that's why they're doing it.
This makes me think of how Melody and I sometimes think about podcast guests, right? Like we love having new people on the show, but then we also sometimes are like, oh yeah, let's have this previous guest on the show because we've already had them on the show. They know our setup. We know they're a good talker. They are a known quantity. And I feel like if I were a producer, sure, you always have to have new people coming on, but having some known quantity that you know are good talkers on camera, know like how to pretend like the cameras aren't on you when they are on you, like basically that they're good reality stars. It's like known, it's a known quantity, essentially. And then the other thing that I think about is how a lot of people I know use these shows much the way that like traditionally housewives doing tasks at home would use soap operas, right? Like it's not, they're not using it as a primary viewing experience. They're using it as background, and that could be while they're doing laundry or while they're on their phone, right? So using it as a second screen. And so I think that that creates a perceived hunger, right? So like the question says, does anyone want 40 seasons of these shows? And like, I don't know, but it's there, right? And so Netflix sees those viewing numbers and is like, it's there, so we can create more of it's there.
Totally. I mean, a company like Netflix is also, in part trying to build up a library of shows. And for a long time, they licensed shows from other companies and movies to have a kind of a back catalog of things for people to watch. But the goal over time is to drive more and more viewers to the thing that you own, the show that you own and produce versus the thing that you license from elsewhere. So, that's why, we don't see Friends on Netflix anymore because they didn't own it. So it got pulled back. And so now they need to replace that with something else. So absolutely having many, many, many seasons of these shows works incredibly well for keeping people in that ecosystem. I also, I can't believe it's taken me this long to mention, but when we're talking about this ecosystem, the show that I just am so fascinated by right now and love is The Traitors on Peacock. And I think is another really good example of this. It's a format that was started elsewhere and came to the US. And what Peacock has done with it is they've cast pretty much in this most recent season entirely reality TV stars to appear on it. And it's a competition series where a group of people go to a Scottish castle and Alan Cumming is the host. And he's just, dressed the most fabulously you could ever imagine. And he's got a great Scottish brogue. And they essentially play like a game of Mafia where a couple people get selected as traitors and everyone else are faithful. And the traitors, murder people at night and kick them off the show, and the faithful have to try to figure out who the traitors are in their midst. And there's silly games and competitions and things they can win money, and it's so fun. And part of the reason it's so fun is because there's a bunch of Real Housewives and other like reality
with established
TV
character tropes,
exactly.
Right? Like so, you might not know all of them, but it's like they're legible in terms of their character to a lot of people who are coming to this show.
100%. There's Survivor contestants and Big Brother contestants. And, it's fun to watch them all try to bring their different styles of gameplay. And it's been huge for Peacock, massive for Peacock. And I'd argue it's probably like the biggest original TV show on Peacock at this point. And it's...
low bar,
but it's been so huge, and it works so well because it drives people back to shows that NBC owns, like the Bravo shows, and keeps everyone in that orbit. And it has incredible staying power for this platform. I mean, I've heard anecdotally from friends that like the reason to subscribe to Peacock is if you're a huge reality TV fan. That's where you get all your Bravo shows and all that reality TV. And so it makes it even more of a must subscribe to then have this new thing that everyone's talking about.
Okay, so this brings us full circle. It's our last question. And it's about, this is Melody's choice of words, the so-called plots of these shows and how they've changed over time. I love the plot of reality television show. Usually it's like, we need to go somewhere, right? Or we have an appointment. This is from Molly.
What happens when the reality show becomes about the show instead of about the people's lives in it? I'm specifically talking about Vanderpump Rules and how after Scandoval, season 11 has been very meta and doesn't pretend to be about anything else but filming / the show. It's not really about these people trying to make it because in so many ways they already have. Brian Moylan's recaps for New York Magazine touch on this a lot.
I mean, this is so fascinating from a celebrity studies perspective. Like, it's like a movie that's about being a movie star. It's like Notting Hill. I love it. I could watch it over and over again. Julia Roberts being Julia Roberts in, is it Ocean's 12 or Ocean's 13? Like, these are these moments where they're trying to reflect on the fact that they're creating a reality television show, and what does it mean to be a reality television show. That's way more interesting to me than like making it in a restaurant. What's your take?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. And I also don't know where else Vanderpump Rules could have gone at this point. I mean, it's just they couldn't avoid it any longer. They had to acknowledge it. And one of the characters, again, I keep saying characters, one of the people on the show, you've got me really thinking about it now, Lala Kent made a really interesting point in the most recent finale where she was talking about the fact that in the past she had not been honest about parts of her life and herself on the show. She had been having an affair with a married man and she denied it on camera, and that she had learned to be more honest and truthful as part of the show, and that she felt a lot better being honest and upfront. And that
I feel like she's probably not being wholly honest in her confession of learning to be honest, but I get it.
Probably not. But she was making the point that Ariana and Tom, the couple at the center of Scandoval, hadn't been honest to audiences about their relationship for a long time, and that they needed to be honest about their relationship. And I just thought that was so interesting, you know, that as much as we do see these shows as having plots and story arcs and things that are molded by producers, that the people who really buy into being on reality TV do still at the end of the day feel that there is an honesty to what they're doing and to being vulnerable in front of the whole world. And I don't know, just left me with a lot of food for thought about, assuming Vanderpump Rules comes back for another season, what that would look like. And maybe it's time for a refresh. Maybe they need to bring on some new people with some new story arcs and who really are, toiling away, working at at least of Vanderpump's restaurants, because maybe it's too hard for these people who've been on TV for a decade now to be able to kind of separate the TV show from the real life.
I think about that with the Kardashians, because the show started out as a show about what it meant to be slightly famous, right? And then it became a show about what it meant to be very famous. And I thought in the midsection there, it was still really interesting. I was telling Melody yesterday that I watched all of the seasons in which Kim was pregnant because it was really, really compelling to see how she grappled with the pressure to have like the right sort of pregnancy and how she internalized that criticism and I watched all of that for a chapter in one of my books, but now it feels like they have one day a month where they sit down and are just made up and talk about being doing their glam and slight things in their lives. It's not actually a real reflection on being famous in the same way that it was. It's evolved past that. And so evolve is probably not the right word even there. It's devolved. And so I think there is a time limit on how long a reality show can move forward with that sort of meta commentary.
Absolutely, especially when it's a show that is made up of the same group of people, as opposed to one of these shows where new, fresh contestants or participants come in every year. You're right. I mean, I felt the same about the Kardashians, when it was really giving you a window into their manipulation of the media. And I say manipulation not in a negative way, but just, they're very savvy about how they use the media to project to the world who they are as a family and as individuals. And when you could kind of watch it 6 months removed from the actual events that they were portraying on screen and kind of see the backstory to that, or at least the backstory that they wanted to tell us about, it was fascinating. I mean, I remember when Kim had been robbed in Paris, and she talked about that on the show afterwards, how powerful and interesting that was to hear her perspective and have her kind of disclose a little bit more about that experience. And she'd been holding that back up until the show. And she gave that kind of exclusively to her own show. It was fascinating media commentary. But you're right. It's hard now. They have different interests to protect. They're business people, and they are maybe not as incentivized to disclose as much about their lives on camera as they used to be.
Okay, this is a surprise question for us to end. You have top 3 pantheon of reality television shows that you're only allowed to access. Like, you only can watch these 3 shows for the rest of your life. What 3 shows would they be?
Oh my gosh, that's hard. Some of the shows I haven't even talked about, but are near and dear to my heart. I love Top Chef. And during the pandemic, my husband and I went back and watched a lot of old seasons of Top Chef. And so I think that's one it would be hard for me to give up. I also really love The Great Pottery Throwdown, which is a show that used to...
It's a culture study fave. Like, people love it.
Yeah,
yes.
It's great. It's like, it's so different from the kind of reality TV we've been talking about today that it, didn't even bear mentioning, but it's like, it's comforting reality TV. Although if I had to choose, I think I'd probably choose The Great British Baking Show, because that's another comfort fave. And then, I guess
we got to have one high drama.
I know.
You got to have one melodrama.
I'm very partial to Love is Blind, and I do love it, and I eagerly await new seasons. It's hard to pick it over Love Island, which has become kind of a newer fascination for me. And the great thing about Love Island is that there are like so many seasons, and each season is like 50 or 60 episodes. So if I'm thinking about what I'm taking to my desert island, like, that would keep me entertained for years. So
yeah, that's like when people are like, oh, do you want to bring like the 2 seasons of The Bear or all episodes of Grey's Anatomy? All episodes of Grey's Anatomy.
Exactly. I've been embarking on a Love Island, not a rewatch, a first-time watch. I've watched some of the more recent seasons, but I've been going back and watching some of the older seasons, and that's so fascinating to see how things have shifted over time. And it's just been bringing me great joy to have that, like, as something I can dial up when I need a break.
Natalie, this has been such a pleasure. You have so much insight into this world, and I think our listeners are just going to love it. So if people want to find more from you, where can they find you on the internet?
Yeah, my writing about the entertainment industry is at vanityfair.com, and I'm also on most social media platforms as at Nat Jarv.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Culture Study Podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We have so many great episodes in the works, and I promise you don't want to miss any of them. If you want to suggest a topic, ask a question about the culture that surrounds you, or submit a question for our subscriber-only advice time segment, check the show notes for a link to our Substack. If you want to support the show and get bonus content, head to culturestudypod.substack.com. It's $5 a month or $50 a year, and you'll get ad-free episodes, an exclusive advice time segment, weekly discussion threads for each episode, and a link to a special Google form so that your questions go to the front of the line. The Culture Study Podcast is produced by me, Anne Helen Peterson, and Melody Rowell. Our music is by Poddington Bear. You can find me on Instagram at Anne Helen Peterson, Melody at Melodious47, and the show at Culture Study Pod. Thank you so much for your support.